Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of the OTT.X Wednesday Webinar series. On behalf of myself, Eric Hansen, and all of us here at OTT.X, we are so happy you're joining us today. Whether you're watching live or on demand, it's a privilege to share with you the experience, insights, and wisdom from the people that are shaping the OTT CTV industry today. Operational elements like storage and asset management often get overlooked or backburnered in the early stages of an organization's evolution. But it is truly vital that OTT businesses have a strategy for managing the barrage of media assets that can quickly become a swirling vortex of files, sucking hours and hours, piles of money, and a ton of the fun out of your business. Today, we are fortunate to have with us three experts in the field of media asset management to dive into primary research on insights about how the OTT industry is tackling asset management challenges. They'll also discuss best practices for OTT publishing and video archive management to improve library utilization, operational speed, and efficiency. From Backlight, I am thrilled to welcome to the OTT.X webinar stage, Ed Lacynski, EVP of Strategic Partnerships, Keara McCarthy, Director of Product Marketing, and Mike Szumlinski, EVP of Product. Welcome.
Thanks, Eric.
Hello.
How's everything going this morning?
Great. Super excited to be here.
Ryan.
Yeah,
it's awesome.
Lunchtime here, but all about the same. Feels about the same. And then back-to-backs all day. So good to have this opportunity to chat about media asset management and OTT with the OTT.X audience.
Cool. Yeah, it's something that I spent a lot of time surrounded by many piles of files and and going all the way back to 2006, 2007 when we launched Xbox, the Xbox Video Marketplace at Microsoft. So with that, I'll turn the stage over to y'all, and we'll see you in a little while.
Great. Well, I will start sharing. Does everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Make sure we're all set. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. As Ed said, we are from Backlight, and we are happy to be here with the OTT.X audience. Eric gave us a brief introduction. My name is Keara McCarthy. I am the Director of Product Marketing at Backlight, and I'm joined by Ed and Mike. In case you don't know about Backlight, I just want to give a little brief introduction here. Backlight is a global media and technology company that offers cloud-based software solutions that cover every stage of the video and entertainment content lifecycle. We work with customers on their creation of video and media content through the monetization. And our product lines you may have heard of include Iconic, CineSync, F-Track, Celtics, Gem, Wild Mocha, and Zype. So some pretty well-known brands within the OTT industry. We're used by both creative and operational teams to provide capabilities ranging from secure and efficient media management, some of which we'll get into today, narrative design, production tracking, creative collaboration, OTT monetization, and hyper distribution across digital platforms. So again, we're thrilled to be here today, and I'd like to just turn it over to my other panelists, Ed and Mike, for them to give just a brief background on what they do for Backlight. So Ed, why don't you go first?
Sure. Hey, everyone. I'm Ed Laczynski. I am the head of strategic partnerships at Backlight and also the founder of Zype and on the board of Backlight, and really excited about what we're working on here and this report that we're going to talk about today, which started with the Iconic line, which Mike, one of the founders of, we'll talk a lot more about, but really exciting to see the kind of like data and research that we've been doing over the last 5 years and really the evolution of storage and cloud media, and excited to talk about that today. So thanks for this.
Thank you. Mike, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thank you, Keara. My name is Mike Szumlinski. I am the VP of Product for Backlight, one of the founding members of the Iconic product as well. Been doing this stuff for a little over 20 years now, ranging everything from the creative space into broadcast, automation, delivery. So happy to be here to speak to some of the experiences we have and some of the data we've been able to collect around this.
Great, thanks very much. Now, Eric gave a brief intro to what we're going to discuss today, but I'll just throw up a bit of an agenda here so you can see where we'll head in this discussion. So first, as we said, we're going to review some of the key findings from Backlight Iconic's 2024 Media Stats Report and its insights on media management. We'll talk a little bit about where people are storing their content and why, how they're accessing it, and for what purposes. And we'll discuss how this relates specifically to the OTT industry and their audiences, and how our OTT customers are tackling their media management challenges today. We'll also talk a little bit about how you, as the OTT provider, can maximize the content of your library by improving media management. And we'll suggest some operational best practices for OTT publishing and video archive management, discuss some of the tools that can help with library utilization, as Eric mentioned, and give you that operational speed and efficiency you're looking for. And we'll also have a Q&A. So if you have any questions throughout the session, please put them in the Q&A tab in your Zoom window. So with that, I want to just level set our discussion here by touching on one of the main themes of this discussion, which is extracting the most value from content rights. This is something that clearly OTT platform creators want to learn and master as they try to differentiate their OTT platforms. So we're seeing companies across a variety of industries, not just media and entertainment, feeling the pressure to build out their media footprints. And, this is something we've seen in the Iconic report, but, in the trades, we see things like companies that are not from the traditional media and entertainment space trying to get into it. So a prime example of this is Walmart and their decision to buy Vizio. So, have this great line of consumer products and retail business, and they want to see how they can utilize advertising that Vizio and OTT platforms have to drive more awareness of their products and get that customer data and sync it with some of the touch points where they're distributing. So within this drive to gather and master media content, streaming platforms are really at the forefront of this industry sort of pressure. Next TV projected yesterday that revenue generated by US streaming services is finally going to surpass sales from pay TV operators. So streaming services are really at the forefront, and OTT platforms want to get their hands on as much content as possible to differentiate their platform. So, this is a trend that's been ongoing for a while, but, it just seems to becoming more pressureful as the days go by. We'd like to put this into perspective by talking about some of the key trends we're seeing from media organizations at Backlight. And I think this quote from Whit Jackson of Wasabi gives a good perspective on this, saying that different organizations are looking to remove friction from their media workflows while also extracting as much value as they can from their content assets. So, Ed, knowing that you have a pulse on a lot of our customers, first as your position as a CEO of Zype initially, but now in your role as strategic partnerships, what kind of friction do you see some of our OTT customers experiencing in their workflows today when it comes to managing their media? You might be on mute.
Sorry about that. How did we mean it did that today? Thanks, Keara. Yeah, so it's a good point. Like there's friction in workflows. I think depending on the size of operator that you are, whether you're doing your owned and operated platform and you have all the real estate and all the different connected TV devices, or maybe you're focused on fast distribution and riding other people's rails, or you're doing hybrid and stuff on mobile, stuff on the web. One of the big friction points is that formats are constantly evolving and changing, and the requirements for these distribution endpoints is constantly changing, and we're opening up this global audience. So you need more metadata, you need images in different formats and poster sizes, and there's not a single standard for any of this. And so you need a workflow that's flexible. So I found over the years, many of our customers, would do a lot of that preparation work, and they might have, their media and their assets on, hard drives in the office or servers in a data center or in the cloud. And then they have spreadsheets that kind of index all this stuff, and they do the best they can to get prepared and do a launch or, make changes to their OTT apps and platforms. And then all of a sudden the platforms change their specifications, or integrate some new interactive marketing piece that will generate more eyeballs. But to be part of that, you have to have your assets lined up a certain way in the right formats. And so I think there's this like ever evolving, changing dynamic that, if you're not on top of it, it creates a lot of friction. And if you're not flexible in your workflow, basically, like you're going to fall behind. So that's definitely what I've seen over the years, and we don't see it changing, right? It's going to be, the Vision Pro stuff and all the AI and VR changes that are happening in our business. I think we're going to continue to see this need to like be flexible with media and metadata and all that kind of stuff.
Great. Thanks for that, Ed. And now, Mike, we're going to get into this in more detail throughout the presentation, but just at a high level, how do you think that media asset management can help reduce some of this friction that some of these OTT providers are experiencing?
Yeah, I think there's kind of two main facets to this. One is sometimes you don't even know what your own IP library is if you don't have it managed in a meaningful way. We have spoken to larger customers that have this problem where over decades they've accrued a significant amount of IP, and it lives in various different buckets on hard drives, on shelves. And when it comes time to actually monetize that stuff, it's hard to find. And so just the simple action of being able to ascertain what you have, you own it on a piece of paper, a PDF, an agreement, or a licensing contract, but you actually don't know where the content itself lives. And so automating it into distribution is almost impossible if you can't find it in the first place. The second thing is that being able to find that stuff also allows you ways to do variability of distribution. There's a huge uptick in, viral marketing right now through Instagram, TikTok, and Shorts, and being able to find content quickly and then find the important bits of that content to quickly flip that around, not necessarily on the direct monetization, but on the marketing side. There's a huge benefit to having a searchable index of all of your IP with some degree of logic behind that so that you can be really dynamic. So yeah, lots of different reasons why having a solid core under the hood can benefit distributors.
Great. So yeah, in order to get the most value from your content, you really need to know what content you have. And that's what we'll go through today, but great point. So some of the trends that the Media Stats report highlighted, again, just to touch on what this Media Stats report is, but it's a report that Iconic has been putting out for about the past 5 years, and it's the only public presentation of media management data across a variety of industries. Now, this report is based solely on Backlight's data from Iconic, but it does reflect some of the trends in the wider market. And some of these trends, we'll see how they specifically relate to OTT audiences, and we can find some value today in some of their insights, which we'll unpack. Some of these key trends in terms of what's driving asset growth in media management and where are people putting their content and what are they doing with it and why. These are some of the main highlights of the report, which we will have a link to at the end of the presentation. But using these 4 trends that showed up in the report as a guideline for our discussion, I just want to run through what they are before we get deeper into each in detail. So first trend is that data is migrating to the cloud and needs to be made accessible. Second trend, data is growing rapidly and needs to be managed appropriately. Well, that makes sense. Third, we just talked a bit about this. Demand for video and rich media is rising. Certainly, there seems no end in sight for the amount of video that keeps being put out by our customers here at Backlight. But it's certainly a trend we're seeing across all industries as well, not just entertainment. And then 4, more teams are requiring remote access to media libraries. This really started with a shift in remote workflows, but has not abated since the pandemic. So we'll talk about the importance of that as well when it comes to OTT workflows. So the first trend that we're going to dive into is that trend of data migrating to the cloud and needing that data to be accessible. So before the pandemic, as you can see here, the split between data storage being on-prem and in the cloud was pretty much 50-50 from what Iconic had seen. Then 6 months into the pandemic, of course, that prevalence of remote workflows caused a shift to be more heavily skewed by the cloud, taking dominance over on-prem storage. And now we seem to be moving slightly back where some, more storage on the cloud has left and gone back on-prem. So there's this observation here in this report that while preference for cloud storage is certainly growing and continues to be dominant, on-prem storage is still relevant. So I want to throw a question over to you, Ed. How have you seen this on-prem hybrid cloud approach to infrastructure impact content managers that work at OTT companies?
Yeah, I think, look, it's really interesting to see this growth. Obviously, pandemic, drove a lot of companies remote, and like cloud was like the only place you can kind of be where everyone can get to things. So it definitely helped accelerate. But there's a real need and just way of working for a lot of media companies, content licensors, production companies that are moving to direct to consumer distribution. They tend to they have Avid rooms, and they have editing suites, and they have production, and they have these very large files and assets in HD and 4K, and they need to have it available locally at some level, right? And so it's always going to originate somewhere physically, for the most part, and so therefore the sort of the inertia there is around using on-prem storage. And so we've, early on, I remember when we were helping some early publishers get to platforms like Roku, and some of the early TV platforms that are now dominant in connected TV space. They would pull hard drives and load them up with their mezzanine files, and we do a secure transfer, and they'd also send companion spreadsheets and sometimes like their YouTube accounts, because that's the only place they had some stuff. And there's still this like physical media aspect, especially when you're talking about companies that that are doing the editing and doing their own marketing and promotion. So I don't think on-prem's going away. I think it's cloud first in a lot of ways for a lot of companies that are starting new projects. But I would ask Mike, from your expertise coming in from Iconic, are there types of companies or like certain genres or certain sizes where you think like on-prem is this going to be like for the foreseeable future still kind of where it's at, and cloud is more of an add-on, or maybe the reverse? Like what do you see out there, Mike?
Well, I mean, really, one of the benefits of having a hybrid solution when we pulled this data is that we get to see both sides of that. And if you want to look at the on-prem versus cloud debate, it's a capitalization versus OpEx debate. And smaller organizations have a easier way of getting their business off and running with a pure OpEx model. Once you get to a certain size, you can start to evaluate what your costs are, and you can start to capitalize that a little bit, get back into some on-prem storage. But realistically, if you are dealing with original mezzanine files for 4K and 8K material, cloud workflows are not, cost effective currently for raw editorial on that. And that's a lot of what happens before it hits distribution, obviously. So if you're purely a licensor and distributor, cloud can make a whole heck of a lot of sense because your cut downs are limited. It's really marketing cut downs and things along those lines, or distribution, packaging and localization, things along those lines. But it's not true kind of creative decision making. On-prem storage is still where that is at for high-grade professional editorial. And even in hybrid workflows, odds are the blocks that are being sent to, those specific nonlinear editors, like you said, an Avid or an Adobe Premiere or a DaVinci Resolve, that stuff is all happening through on-prem file system storage or virtualized file system storage, which still means those blocks are residing like close to those machines. So that's never going to go away until we hit like the one arc minute light, limit of what human eyes can see. But as the quality of the displays we purchase increases, as things like you said, Vision Pro come out and you have spatial video now, which is multiple layers of 4K quality, like these sorts of things require significant amounts of storage. And the production workflow on that is almost always faster and more efficient at smaller scale with on-premise storage. The collaboration aspect of cloud can't be overlooked. It's very expensive to put 10 people in a building together, give them all workstations, and connect them to hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of storage. Your capital outlay to do that is significant. So when you start to get into true kind of distribution and marketing for that distribution, the cloud really becomes a huge benefactor to, cost efficiency.
That's great.
Yeah, makes sense.
Thanks, Mike. If I am, let's say I am an OTT provider and I'm starting up my business, how do I make the decision in terms of where to store my files? You just talked, Mike, a bit about larger files, more mezzanine copy formats probably make more sense to leverage on-prem infrastructure. But if, I'm just starting out my business, there's a lot of decisions that need to be made. One is, do I go hybrid or do I pick one or the other? And then two, how do I decide which cloud provider to use? So I don't know, Ed, do you have a preference on that, working, maybe from the cloud provider perspective?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, I think Mike hit on this. If you're a sort of pure play distributor, so you're licensing content from others, you need a really easy, smart, and cost-effective way to kind of absorb content from the places you're licensing content from, right? So cloud's a great way to do that, especially if you have specifications and standards around mezzanine files or encoded files for web distribution or CTV distribution. So, I would look first, like, for OTT providers that are already running, or maybe there's a they're going to a new market, for example, because a lot of OTT providers are kind of already in market somewhere. So you go into a new market and you're already using Google Cloud Storage or Wasabi or Amazon Web Services, and you have a track record there, and there's data centers that you can leverage, and in those locations you're going to. It's really easy to like stay with those platforms versus like kind of setting up and racking and stacking or going through a data center solution. But to the point like Mike made earlier, if you're more like end to end, where you own, maybe you're doing a lot of creative and marketing yourself or in-house around the content, and you're trying to drive eyeballs, and you're doing a lot of like maybe some live and cutting that and using it for promo, and maybe you're doing some original production and you own that all in-house, that's where you get into this kind of hybrid mix, right? And so same question on like, what's your preferred like cloud storage provider? And there's a lot of great options out there. But then, what makes sense for you to connect it to your on-premise, your nearline storage, like your editing suites and stuff like that. So there's no easy answer, but I do think it's for the advantage of like OTT distributors and app publishers and all that, it's like all this is available and pretty easy to access today, where in the past it's been you need a lot of like IT support to get this done. Like today you don't need as much IT support to get some of this done. Would you agree with that, Mike?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, like the beauty of hybrid solutions is that the answer is whatever works best for your business. That's why hybrid is such a great approach. Utilize the tools that work best for the work you're trying to do, and stop worrying too much about where it lives. Worry about what the work you need to do is, and then get it to the place that's the most efficient. That's the beauty of hybrid cloud architecture. Okay,
that's a great point. All right, moving on to the next trend that we've been seeing in this report, it's that data is growing rapidly and needs to be managed. This is especially true when it comes to video platforms, with video being so data intensive. And at Backlight, we're seeing this especially among our sports customers. So we have a little graphic here that speaks to the amount of data that some of Iconic's customers have within the sports industry. And I think we're seeing this adoption in sports across a variety of organizations, from both leagues and teams and federations to e-gaming and sports betting, et cetera. I think a lot of this comes from the fact that consumption of sports content has changed. Fans want to see more of their favorite players. They want to see more games, tournaments, not just the live feeds initially, but also cut downs and highlight reels and the ancillary shoulder content and interviews. So we see a lot of media companies in the sports realm having to produce more and more content, needing to keep pace with this desire that they're seeing from their fans. So Ed, let me throw it to you. What are some of the challenges of streamers and publishers that have sports content that they're facing around asset management? What are some of the challenges when it comes to management of sports content specifically? And Mike, you can see this, you can add to this question as well in your answer, knowing that you sometimes deal on the front lines with some of our sports customers.
Yeah, thanks, Keara. I think, with sports it's like, sort of this hybrid in the sense that it's live, it's on demand, it's social, it's everywhere. There's a lot of marketing around it. It's very immediate. It's sort of the last place that we in society all commune together to watch things at the same time, no matter where you are, what sports you love. Like sports are one of the last places for that. So there's a lot of immediacy, urgency, and mission criticality around sports. And from a media asset management and OTT distribution perspective, imagine that the amount managing the core on-demand video assets and live video assets, all the metadata around advertising timings, around all of the associated images, whether it's like player cards for every single player or packages that might have to go to social media that are cut almost in real time from like what's happening on screen. There's a lot of data being produced by sports providers. And so, and I think we see this in like in esports as well, right? It's a very similar kind of concept and more digital focused than broadcast, but still some of the same kind of immediacy. So I think, from an asset management perspective, and we work with a lot of OTT publishers and sports, and we see customers like Fox Sports Deportes doing a really good job of integrating their asset management to their OTT platform, to their broadcast platform, back to how they market content on social media by creating little tiny clips that get on Instagram and TikTok and then go back in for later use by an editor if there's a package they want to produce. So having control of that asset and then the set of assets and the metadata is like really, really important to be effective. Otherwise, you need a lot of people, and there's a lot of latency. And once you get to a certain point of latency in sports, like it's old news already, right? So you might just what are you seeing out there?
Yeah, and I can add on to that. I mean, I think the concept of metadata is like incredibly important when it comes to sports content, because sports content by its very nature is long form. There are matches, there are games, there are, series of events that don't just happen in the microcosm of a highlight. They happen over long periods of time. Short sports games are a couple of hours long, regardless of what it is you're looking at in the professional space. And so referencing that original content and finding the meat of it, so to speak, because there's a lot of dead time in professional sports, but then there's a lot of really exciting times in professional sports. And being able to reutilize that content is what we're seeing driving most of the media management growth in the department, because you can have a single object that can have thousands of bits of positive information on it, and you're not storing them thousands of times. You're just referencing back to that original event and the time that those things happen. And then you have that ability to quickly recover that information and reutilize it for whatever your purpose might be, whether it's a highlights reel, whether it's a news show, whether it's marketing. That speed to delivery, as Ed said, it's pretty ephemeral unless it's pretty large scale or highfalutin, sports team members. So being able to get that data quickly and turn it into something valuable is why having metadata and time-based metadata specifically is a very important thing.
I wonder if we can maybe give a bit more sort of concrete visibility to some things that some of our customers are doing. We do have a lot of customers in the sports realm, and I think we've seen through some specific use cases about why it's important for sports customers to have the connection between their streaming platforms and their media management workflows. And Mike, I wonder if you could just maybe talk to some of the advantages to the sports, audience in particular. How are they really making the most out of their archives of content? Tapping into media management using one of our products, Iconic, but then also streaming it out to their platform. Why is it specifically beneficial to the sports industry?
Well, I think what happens in sports, which is quite interesting, is that my view of the sporting event and the excitement factor I have is actually different than yours. Because the players on the field, I have my chosen players, you have your chosen players, I have my chosen team, you have your chosen team. So from a single event, I can now create multiple different tracks of content that are valuable to multiple different people and are really targeted and focused to them. So if you really take this into maybe a more tangible example, if we have multiple players on the team, if you like one of those players and I like a different player, if I have the appropriate metadata, I can build a highlight reel that shows all of the highlights of your player and deliver it to you, and simultaneously show all the highlights of the player I love and deliver it to me. And that's driven by metadata and preference. So as a consumer of the OTT platform, I put in, hey, I like this player, and now I can get custom delivered highlights to me from the original role. And so having that metadata available to go reference that and dynamically build those sorts of things is incredibly powerful.
Great, thank you. All right, moving on to the next trend that we have seen in the report is that there's a demand for video and rich media that is rising. So out of the assets stored in Iconic today, I think this graphic points it out pretty interestingly, only 15% of those assets are video, yet the majority of data stored comes from video. So over 75% of data can be attributed to video assets. So I think this is, clear to see that there is a growth in terms of video, as we know, and it is data heavy. But at the bottom, we're also seeing that there is a preference for different forms of content in the form of audio as well. So I think that we're seeing a growth in the duration of video and assets stored, which demonstrates a preference for not only video storytelling, but also we're seeing more podcasts and audio content being stored for podcast purposes and other purposes. I know when I've seen some of the streaming content that I like to watch on HBO Max, for instance, they have a specific tile next to the episode I like to view, showing that I can listen to a podcast conversation around the show that I've been watching. So how are we seeing more OTT providers increasing the amount of audio stored in their platforms as well as just video assets?
Yeah, so Keara, I think, absolutely seeing this, kind of real emergence and preference for different types of formats, and particularly in audio with podcasting, as you mentioned. Like, we're seeing customers in specific verticals build their own podcasting apps and kind of have an engagement and experience around that. In the faith space, we have a customer, Pray.com, does a really good job of this, and really, really bespoke, really focused on like what their audience cares about. And then obviously, for the most part, podcast distribution it's sort of like completely commoditized and normalized right now, right? So there's relatively straightforward ways to get content shareable, linkable, discoverable, playable on Spotify and Apple iTunes, all this kind of stuff. So it's an easy path of distribution and engagement. So yeah, and I think the other side of it is the other types of assets we're starting to see emerge, right? Like, as OTT publishers, app builders, fast providers, folks that are supporting this more industry in terms of marketing, there's a lot of companion assets. These could be short clips, these could be images. We talked about thumbnails, player cards, et cetera, that combined with audio can be really impactful in like a stories format, can be really impactful in a web or mobile context. So, it's not just about distribution, it's also about the marketing side of things. And like there's just a huge amount of like new content being created every day, and to serve all these different audiences in all these different places. And I think I think we see here like audio grew faster than video over the past year.
Yeah,
Right.
I think there's also something that's interesting to note, and when I say it out loud, it's probably going to become really obvious to everybody, but video without audio is not super interesting, but every single one of us listens to audio without video with daily regularity. So there is a wider accessible market for audio content than there is for video, just in general. The desire to pay for video content may be higher, but the audio content being produced is in a higher volume because it is something that's accessible in a variety of ways, not just with a screen in front of you. And so we've seen a lot of customers taking content that is traditionally video and figuring out how to rip that down into podcasts if it is of a format that can do that. Not all formats obviously work well that way. You don't want to listen to an action movie. It's probably pretty boring, but you definitely can listen to much of your news content or much of your talking heads content or your editorial content just as well as you can visualize it. And for some customers, that's actually preferable for some of those content types.
Great. Thanks for that, Mike. Okay, so the next trend is, this idea of remote workflows and the need to have remote access and collaboration. So while we've seen in the previous slides that organizations are migrating to the cloud at their own pace, these hybrid cloud structures offer flexibility to move assets back and forth, and most importantly, allow for remote workflows. So as more teams, are requiring remote access to their media library, they also need to collaborate more remotely as well. We're seeing this in a lot of our customers as well, that, collaboration really matters. And there's lots you can do over media assets for OTT platforms for sure. So, Ed, how are you seeing needs for collaboration play out in the OTT provider market today?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, again, early on as OTT market has evolved, I think, initially was collaboration around, hey, organizing playlists, curating, avails, and making sure that the right content's in at the right time. And late editorial around promo and things like that. So basic collaboration needs of like someone who's distributing content. As we've evolved and we have 100 plus OTT and fast platforms and ecosystems, many of them with like global boundaries. It's a different marketplace in Australia than it is in Europe than it is in the US. That collaboration becomes even more important, right? We have to make sure that we're understanding like what makes sense for each market, collaborating around transcription, for example. Big challenge for OTT distributors that are taking content in that might have been sourced from in one language and needs to be ready in another, or for compliance reasons, or maybe they want to extend their footprint to like an expat market or something like that. So being able to collaborate around your media without having to break out of your workflow for curation is, I think, really important. And also just like a necessary thing now that we're in a hybrid model, right? Like there's very few companies, particularly in the OTT space, that have like everything they need under one roof physically from 9 to 5 every day, right? There's collaborating with your distribution partners, there's your marketing teams, we're all over the place, right? We're hybrid, we're remote working. So just in general, like online and cloud-based collaboration is more important and people are used to it, but particularly for OTT distribution and the fragmentation and all these different markets, like we need to be able to talk about our content and our media and make decisions quickly. So that's my take on it. It's pretty important.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mike. What would you add to that?
Yeah, I would say, there's kind of what I think we've all learned from when we all were working from home for a little while, that it's pretty awesome. I mean, in most cases from the day to day, but it also is an impediment to quick action in some cases. And we've also found that getting in a room with some people from time to time can get a lot done with a very short period of, time associated with it. And so again, hybrid work lines up to hybrid cloud pretty well. Cloud really enables people to collaborate without all having to be in the same room. But sometimes you can get some really good work done quickly if everybody's in the same room. And I think that's what the last stat here really points to, right? Like everybody wants to have that little bit of freedom in what they want to do. But there is still a true benefit to getting in a room with other human beings and getting stuff done. And without a hybrid model for technology, the hybrid work model can't work. It's kind of, the desire for the hybrid work model is really being driven by the availability of the technology right now, more than the opposite.
Great. And moving to the next trend that we see, we're seeing, and then this is one that we didn't point out at the beginning, but it's one that kind of came up in the report. And I think, we could all say we're seeing a lot more attention being put towards API-driven workflows. We're seeing more and more companies leveraging these API-driven workflows and automation to give themselves greater efficiency and control over their workflows and sort of take away some of the more nuisance items and rely on things that can be automated to create greater efficiency. So I want to get your thoughts here on this. Mike, how can APIs help speed up operational efficiency when it comes to working with a media asset management platform?
Yeah, so I mean, media asset management platforms oftentimes become the hub of knowledge for kind of all your workflows, whether it's editorial, distribution, collaboration, reviews, it's where all that stuff lands. And so being able to automate against that and be able to query that is pretty critically important. And having an API first kind of mentality allows customers to make decisions faster than manufacturers oftentimes. So if the data can live in the system in some way, the way in which it gets in and out is no longer limited by the user interface that we design as manufacturers. Customers can actually go and build their own user interfaces and user experiences and still have it land so that all the rest of the people in the world that are using the tool have that same warm, fuzzy user experience. And realistically, businesses do things uniquely. Otherwise, we'd all be one big, super, hyper global mega business. And therefore, there are tools oftentimes that are specific to those businesses that as a manufacturer, we're never going to build because I cannot build a one-of-one product and expect it to be profitable for us as a product manufacturer. But what I can do is open up the world of accessibility to our tools and allow your one-off tools that are very specific to your business use case to access all that data. And that's where the power of APIs really come in.
Great. And bringing that specifically to the OTT audience, Ed, how have you seen API sort of prevalence amongst our customers at Backlight? And how are they using APIs within their workflows to make their lives easier?
Yeah, I think it's so important. Like our some of our most successful customers, and ultimately like successful with their businesses and their business plans, is the most important thing for us, right? We want to help get, make sure we're helping our customers be successful, and what makes them unique. To Mike's point, are the ones that like rely on the APIs and are able to build their differentiation. So we have customers in the corporate video space. One customer comes to mind called Health Fitness. They're doing sort of a walled garden type OTT platform that sits on CTVs for corporate fitness and health. And to do that, they have to kind of like integrate with like the corporate firewall. Like this is what they do. And so they can use APIs to kind of tag content for their end customers, make sure that users can log in with the right security levels, make sure things stay compliant. So and it gets down to the media asset supply chain as well, because they're producing new content, they're licensing content, they're doing marketing within like the sort of corporate like intranet, for lack of a better word, and they want to make sure that stuff makes it from A to B really quickly. They can collaborate on it and all that kind of stuff. So, I think if you just rely on, products as like silos and say like, I have this silo product. This is my like, these are where like my files are stored. This is my content management system. Like this is my linear system. This is my like web stuff. And they're not talking to each other. You're probably at a minimum spending more than you have to. And then you may also be like, not as competitive, basically, because the most competitive OTT platforms are investing in APIs.
Great. All right, so we've talked a little bit about media asset management and how that can help support your media workflows, specifically for OTT providers. And I thought we could bust a couple myths that there might be out there about media asset management. Perhaps some things that some of the audience members might be thinking about. Maybe they have a preconceived notion of what a MAM could do for them. And so I want to speak to some of these myths here and get your thoughts, Ed and Mike, on how you would sort of combat these. So the first one is media asset management platforms are only useful for large enterprise teams. What would you guys say to that one?
You know, tooting our own horn a little bit, that probably was the case 5 years ago. But being able to democratize the platform a bit and lower that, you know, kind of CapEx cost, the tools have always been valuable outside of large enterprise teams. The problem was the products weren't affordable for anyone but large enterprise teams for a long time. So I think it's you know, tail wagging the dog a little bit on that one. It was a market problem and a deployment problem and a productization problem across the industry, not so much a customer desire or real use case problem.
All right. And what about the second one? You know, some of the audience members might be saying, well, I already have a CMS for content management. I don't need a MAM platform. Ed, what would you say to this one?
Yeah, I think, you know, the content management is really about, you know, the connectivity much closer to the distribution endpoints, right? There's a whole world of like collaboration, production, sharing, syndication, ingest, like lots of things, operations, like the media operations that that OTT distributor has to do that aren't really fit for CMS, right? CMS is like really good at making sure you're able to publish, curate, analyze, get data from all the different platforms, including owned and operated. But you know, we're talking about something that you know, how do you traffic? How do you shuttle files? How do you make sure the metadata can persist over years of investments? And so we've found that companies, again, to Mike's point, like there's lots of media asset management systems out there. A lot of them were built on like hard iron and have really high costs to them and really high kind of like a lot of brain damage to learn how to use them and integrate them, or really were sold more to like the IT buyer. Like content management in the cloud, like MAM in the cloud is now a thing that sort of a business buyer can approach and look how it adds value. And I think it adds a lot of value. And I think you do need to be thinking about this, even if your MAM is like Dropbox, you got to have something integrated that makes sense for you.
Thanks. All right, and the last myth, media asset management, it's really just a closed ecosystem for storage and you know, doesn't bring much to the table. Mike, what would you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, that might have been true in, you know, 2002. But realistically, it's not, it's far from closed. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It's an open ecosystem to be able to bring in information from a variety of sources and have a central source of truth. Oftentimes, that's the biggest problem when you start to scale your business is, hey, I have this big NAS and it's full of all of our content. And then one day you fill it up. And that means you have to have a second piece of storage. And maybe that's the same thing, or maybe it's a completely different thing because now you're doing two-tiered storage with an archive. But if you don't have something that can talk to all those different places, now it's in control of whoever administers those systems to memorize what is on those things. And one storage, hey, that's doable. Two storages starts to get hard. Three storages, now you're into kind of three-body problem territory where the amount of intricacies are almost impossible to overcome.
All right, thanks so much, both of you. Now, before we head to the Q&A, and I encourage you to put any questions in the chat if you have them, I just want to wrap up some of the things we talked about today to help some of our audience members realize how they can maximize the value of their content library. Some of the things that we talked about today, when it comes to OTT publishing and video archive management workflows is, when it comes to content, it's important to create more accessibility for different audiences. So we talked a little bit about this, different content types, different formats, whether that's long form to short form video assets to audio only files, or thinking about the distribution endpoints and the formats needed for mobile or desktop or CTV. It's important for providers to cater to what and how their audience wants to engage with. The importance of creating different pieces of localized content or creating different kinds of cut downs for different platforms. Audiences are demanding more and more content, and it really helps if you have a media asset management system to help you manage this workload. Another aspect that we talked about was the importance of having a holistic view over all your assets can really help you operate more efficiently, whether your infrastructure is on-prem or it's in the cloud. Having a complete purview over your library is really where media asset management systems can help you by, as Mike said, indexing what you have, making sure you know what you have, and how you can make it easily accessible to remote employees that you work with and collaborate remotely with them to make it surfaceable. And then lastly, learn to leverage that metadata. As your asset library grows, metadata is going to help you surface more of the relevant assets so that you can build more content offerings around them. Things like, as we said, transcription, leveraging speech to text, can help you build out associated metadata quickly and pull assets to surface when the moment matters, when the moment strikes, whether that's around a specific live event or creating a collection of on-demand content that you think will be relevant to your audience at a certain time. So I want to leave it there, and I will pass it back over to Eric for a Q&A.
Hey, everybody, thanks a lot. That was fantastic. Actually, at least I think for me and many of our viewers, storage and archiving, it seems like a little bit of a, oh yeah, we gotta store stuff. We gotta, the thing is though, just having a bunch of files isn't managing them. And well, I've got a bunch of files. They're on a drive. They're in the cloud. That's also not managing. You got to be able to find them and find the right one when you need it. We used to have a term back when I used to run operations that described kind of the role of about half of our staff of 200 people, which was LFSing, which meant looking for stuff. It was actually a little more colorfully defined than that, but that's what you spend your time doing. And if you're not doing that right now, and you're in this business, well, then you're gonna be if you're successful, because it's not just the film or the movie file or the television episode file. It's the 12 different versions for different territories and subs and dubs and artwork and all that stuff that goes along with it. And then there's 4 of them that are broken or but you can't tell which one's which. It's really important that you have a system that works for you. So thanks a lot for making that clear. A couple interesting points that you made. One is about automation. Doing automation is great, but it requires that those that are being API'd with are using similar data sets. Are you standards, best practices? Are you seeing that between the partners in the ecosystem now?
Yeah, I think generally speaking, when you start to get into modern technology, and this is not a media specific thing, a REST API has now become ubiquitous with the modern web application and the modern SaaS platform and the modern technology stack. So realistically, having a robust and reliable REST API is really all you need, because data translation is not that hard nowadays. Let's be honest. Taking a JSON file that is 7 different keys and 7 different values and modifying the way that structure works is maybe a line or two of code, or maybe using a Zapier function, or maybe using some low code, no code alternatives. And so the data migration or data transformation effort has significantly lessened, because the standard of the web is how the API interchange is happening now. You obviously have to have enough competency to understand what those translations are, but I don't think it's a realistic expectation that we will ever see a compliance and standards taxonomy for media and entertainment. So even if we all wanted it and loved it, it would be great until the next piece of technology came out that required an extension of it, and then it all breaks all over again. So having the ability to do kind of transformations is quite a bit more powerful than the idea of taxonomical standards. We have hundreds and hundreds of businesses using the Iconic product currently, and I doubt a single one of them has a similar or identical taxonomy to any other one. And that doesn't mean it's not helping their businesses.
Well, you know what? Amen to that. I spent a ton of time, and many of us have, trying to get metadata and rights data and all the data into consistent formats so that we can ingest it and manage it. And yeah, to the extent that we get machines that can fix that for us, that's fantastic. I would love to spend a ton more time talking to you all about well, not necessarily standards, but about managing assets and helping to support businesses that are maybe starting to get to that point where they're seeing the cyclone of the swirling vortex, as I guess I called it earlier, of files and what they are and what they might be in their own systems. But unfortunately, we are out of time. But so maybe y'all can come back sometime and hang out with us a little more. It was a great presentation. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Eric.
To Ed, Keara, and Mike, and everybody from Backlight. That was essential and practical for everybody that's in this business. And thanks to all of you, our dear audience, for attending and for your continued support of OTT.X. As always, session was recorded and is going to be available on the OTT.X website at OTT.X.org, along with an impressive collection of presentations and other videos from online and in-person events over the last few years. I want to make sure to mention that our flagship online event, OTT.X Online Live, is quickly approaching. It's the 6th edition of the event, and it's being held on March 20th from 9:30 a.m. to 1 p.m. Pacific, right in your own home. We'll be hearing from execs, leaders, and experts across the industry with panels and presentations discussing a broad spectrum, timely and essential topics in the world of online distribution. OTT.X is proud to offer Online Live free this year as a complimentary service to the OTT.X industry. The OTT industry. Thanks to the many OTT.X members and event sponsors for making this possible. You can register from our site at OTT.X.org or by using the link that we'll drop in the chat box right now. If you're not yet a member of OTT.X, we'd like to invite you to find out more about the many benefits of membership in OTT.X. Visit our site, OTT.X.org, or just drop us a line, info@OTT.X.org. We'd love to hear from you. That concludes today's webinar. Thanks for being a part of the OTT.X community, and have a great rest of your day, everybody.
Thank you.